bit about how I prep. Confession's usually on a Saturday, so around Friday, I'll be like, okay, I gotta start thinking about like what I'm gonna say. And so I typically try to pick like my top 3 things I'm feeling guilty about, because typically I don't have any mortal sins, hopefully, right? Fingers crossed. And so I need to figure out what I need to talk about. Now, it's okay if you want to talk about something that you have forgotten to mention in your past confession. So like, as I've been on this journey personally, things have come up from my past because I was baptized as an infant. Obviously, I don't have that like baptism, like whitewash in my life. It was in infancy. So when things come up that happened, you know, even like 10 years ago, whatever it is, if I've never like confessed it, even though it's been forgiven, one, if it's a mortal sin, you have to say it. So if there's a risk of it being a mortal sin, you have to say it. But also two, sometimes it just is nice to say it out loud. Usually the things that we forget about or the things that we go, oh gosh, that was wrong, are embarrassing. They hurt to say out loud. It's very, very humbling. You need to remember that the priest is just there in person, but you're talking to Jesus. So, and he loves you more than you'll ever know. So don't freak out about saying, you know, just, I'm not going to say anything on camera, but you know, like, you guys know there's things, especially like, I don't know. In this day and age, it's very easy to fall into sin if you fall in at all with a secular society. So the best way to do it is if the church says it's wrong and you're doing it, go to confession. So I do want to say really fast that it is easier to be completely 100% on board with the Catholic faith than it is to be a cafeteria Catholic. I was raised as a cafeteria Catholic. I spent the majority of my life as a cafeteria Catholic. We made all sorts of decisions based on our will, not his. And it made life confusing because you kind of have one foot in each door. And, you know, you just kind of go through life like that. I don't know if you guys have ever gone to confession and like not said something because you're like, oh, I don't think that's a sin. I know the Catholic Church thinks that's a sin, but I don't think that's a sin. I know there's Catholics out there like that because not every Catholic is traditional. And so once you put both feet into the church, your life like really calms down. You know, once you understand what your sexuality is for, once you understand the idea of vocation, once you understand all sorts of things, it just clarifies everything. And there's so much beauty there. And the Catholic Church doesn't tell you, you know, these lists of rules like your examination of conscience or how they break out each commandment and they, you know, add on to things. Thou shalt not kill includes abortion, includes some other things. You know, those aren't made up and they all have like a point to them. And that's what's so beautiful about the Catholic Church is you can find a why for anything. Go read Humanae Vitae and figure out why you can't use birth control. Like, there's a why. I didn't know that why when I was younger, and I sure wish I had. But I didn't. And I don't know, you know, if you guys know what that why is. And, I mean, most of you guys seem very traditional. But I'm going to say, for any of you out there who are watching this that are younger or just haven't put both feet in, put both feet in. And don't have sex before marriage. Don't live together. Don't do anything that the church is not to do. Your life will just calm down and it'll be, and you know what? If you suffer a little bit, align it with Christ and move on. But, you know, no one said this life was supposed to be easy and no one said this life was supposed to be about you. It's about God. It's about His will. And there are some rules involved, but life becomes beautiful when you just align it with His. So that's my little soapbox moment for a minute. Okay, so examination of the conscience. You gotta find one, you gotta find 5. I like to read a bunch of different ones because some of them are really simple and I'm just like, yeah, I don't do that, I don't do that, I don't do that. And so it's like, what do you do when you've stopped doing like the big sins, you know, the big no-nos? When you stop doing those, you gotta kind of go deeper and say, well, gosh, let's look at the virtues, which I will link below, a examination of conscience kind of thing that I found based on the virtues, if I can find it. It was like, I printed it out, so I'll have to see if I can find the resource. But there's examination of conscience for married couples. If you're in a rough part in your marriage, that's probably a good one. There's the examinations of consciences for parents. There's for single people. There's for children. There's just Google it. The Laude app has a few. Relevant Radio has a whole how to make a good confession. This missal I have here, in the back, it has a form of examination of conscience. It goes through 4 questions. It says, the Lord says you shall love the Lord your God with your whole heart. The Lord says, love one another as I have loved you. And then Christ our Lord says, be perfect as your Father is perfect. That's a good place to start. Another book that I have found really useful, like I've literally read this in the confession line and then changed like my confession, is The Imitation of Mary. I think these would be good for boys and girls. I don't think you have to be, it's written by a man, but it's so good because Mary was so good and she was a human, right? So she's like our human without sin. And so when you go through this and it talks about purity and it talks about friendship and it talks about faith, and I'm sure it talks about, in trial, silence, greater conformity to God's will. These are all things that you can ponder as you're preparing for a confession. There's no like right or wrong way to prepare for a confession. It literally is just making sure you're spending some time with your heart and with God to kind of realize, like, what do I need to say? What did I do that is just kind of nagging at me? Like, I know when I screw up, like I know now, like the minute after I screw up, ooh, I screwed up. And then it'll nag me until I go take it to the confessional. And so those are great places to start. Whether you've yelled at your kids to the point where you overreacted, or, you were nasty to your husband, or, I'm sure people do all sorts of things. You guys know what you do. So that's the way I prepare for a confession. I really just find like 2 or 3 different examinations of conscience. I also bought a book that I will pin down below. It was super short. It's by some nuns, and it's all about preparing for confession. That was also a really good one. I think it went through some virtues. But yeah, the virtues, of humility and fortitude and prudence and I'm on the spot now with the 7 virtues and I'm not going to get there. But temperance. Gosh, if you drink too much, temperance. So like, right, versus gluttony. Also like in terms of like your senses. So there's so much to talk about with this. We could talk about sin forever. We could talk about confession forever. The best thing just to know is that just to go. Just go. I know it's scary. I get nervous. I go once a month or so and I get nervous. Sometimes I'll put it off a week because I'm just like, oh, I just don't want to go. Like I want to go, but I don't want to go. I'm always nervous in line. I'm always nervous when I first sit down. And I always go face to face because I just like it. I had a priest when I was a kid and he would put his hand on my head when he absolved me. And it just was the most incredible feeling. I wish all priests would, if you go face to face, would literally put their hand on your head, because there's something, just like with veiling, there's something about having that pressure on your head as you're being forgiven. It feels like God has come down from heaven and is like forgiving you. Now, I haven't had a priest since Father Donovan that like actually did that, but I wish that was like standard. But there's probably people who don't want their heads touched. I don't know. It's just a beautiful sacrament. And I honestly feel bad for all the Protestants who don't have access to it, because it is life-changing. It is just, and the more you go, the more grace is given to you to combat those issues. If you're an alcoholic, go to confession once a week and see how God works on your heart to whittle away that addiction. If you're addicted to anything. We all have our things we struggle with, right? If you struggle with overeating, go to confession often and talk about, that you're struggling with, overeating and that you need help with temperance, and ask God. So I'm going to pin a couple. Father Mike has a really nice video on preparing for confession. He has quite a few. So I'm going to pin those below. I'll link any other resources. If I didn't answer your questions about prepping well enough, let me know. Really, it comes down to prayer, examination of conscience, and just going. And I've never had a priest laugh at me. I've never had, if I typically find that they like when I choose about 3, rather than doing a laundry list. Because remember, unless it's a mortal sin, your venial sins are going to be forgiven whether you name them or not. So it's more about that act of really like humbling yourself, saying them out loud like the Bible says to do, and receiving the act of contrition, receiving that absolution, and then doing your penance. And then we could have a whole other video about how sin affects, like I think there's 4 different levels that sin affects, and you know, your penance covers part of that. But I mean, someone wanted me to do a video on purgatory, so I guess that will kind of tie in there. Someone told me once, think of your soul as a board, and every time you sin, a nail goes into the board, and when you go to confession, the nail comes out, but there's still a hole there. And so things like indulgences and penance are kind of the 2 ways that you can kind of fill up those holes. But until we pass away, we will never know if they're fully filled up. Because unless you get baptized like the second before you die, you know, you just don't know. But that's right, because don't be afraid of purgatory, because you are on your way. I mean, I think it's Patrick Madrid who was like, I am jealous if anyone is in purgatory, because yeah, sure, they're like being cleansed right now and it might not feel that great, but they are on their way. He's like, I'm still stumbling around on earth, and I could screw up at any moment and separate myself forever from God, and it's a scary thought. So with that said, guys, have a blessed day. Please put in the comments how you prepare for a confession, how often you go, if you go at all. As Catholics, you're supposed to go at least once a year. And just, if you have any questions, let me know. I would love, love, love to help you out. I have found a very deep love for the sacrament of confession. It was something I went about once or twice a year as a child and as like an adult, and then now I go so much more often than I used to, and it's a beautiful thing. And I can't wait for my daughter to go through her first confession, because then I will have a confession buddy, because my husband sometimes is too busy to make it with me. So, have a blessed day. This is Laura from What Laura Likes. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Oh, and don't forget, the book club starts Monday. So excited. So read those first 30 or so pages and come up with something that you want to talk about, whether you're going to talk about it in the description or whether you're going to make a video. So until next time, have a blessed day. Bye.